Welcome to Who We Remember. I'm Jamie Yuenger, the founder of Story Keep, and your host for this podcast. In each episode, I ask my guests a central question. Whose life story from your family would you most want to see documented on film? My guests share stories of both living and deceased family members, revealing the remarkable lives that have shaped their own. This show is an extension of our mission at Story Keep, where we harness the transformative power of storytelling and film to create profound and lasting masterpieces for families of wealth. Since 2010, we've partnered with over 100 families worldwide, crafting meaningful and immersive legacy films and podcasts that celebrate their shared narratives and deepen connections. On this podcast, I have intimate conversations with family members and advisors, exploring the significant and sometimes very surprising stories of their loved ones. Through these conversations, we elevate and celebrate the enduring influence of one person's life. My hope is that you'll leave each episode inspired to think more deeply about your own story and the legacy that you want to create. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Kristen Heaney to the podcast. Kristen leads the consulting firm In 3 Generations, and she's here to share the story of her mom, Jan, who passed away in December of 2021 after a battle with Alzheimer's. Kristen often speaks about her father's legacy as a business owner and wealth creator, but today she's shining a light on the unsung hero of their family, her mom. Jan was the glue behind the scenes, the one who kept the family running while her husband built their business. She embodied values that profoundly shaped Kristen's life, from instilling a strong sense of purpose and faith to nurturing relationships with love and relentless generosity. Kristen reflects on her mom's extraordinary ability to care for others, often adopting older people in need of companionship, and how those experiences shaped her own outlook on humanity. Jan wasn't perfect, and her life was as complex as it was inspiring. She was married 6 times, loved froyo for dinner, and had a knack for bringing fun and silliness into her everyday life. Her legacy, as Kristen describes it, is rooted in her belief in the value of every person and the power of being fully present with others. Kristen also shares touching memories from her mother's final days, including a story about oak tree acorns and a nurse's dream that beautifully captured her enduring legacy. Before we dive into the conversation, let me just tell you a little bit more about Kristen. Kristen offers consulting to families with significant resources, helping them focus on what matters most: relationships, continuity, personal growth, values, and purpose. Kristen is deeply passionate about her work, drawing from her own experience of inheriting wealth at a very young age after her father's early death. With a background in social work and life coaching, she leads In 3 Generations, where she provides peer group education and individual coaching services. Lastly, I must tell you, when Kristen was a kid, her mom once asked her who her best friend was. And Kristen replied that it was her dog, and she still kind of feels that way with her current dogs, no offense to her human besties, although she does admit that dog ownership was a lot easier when her mom was in charge of all the dog maintenance. All right, let's settle in and join me for this special conversation with Kristen Heaney as we celebrate the incredible life of her mom. Kristen, it's really delightful to sit down with you again and to share the space and have the opportunity to talk about your mom. But I'm cart before the horse. Curious who you decided to speak about was your mom, but I'm curious why she was the one who came to mind when I asked you this question of, whose life story would you most want to document? Why your mom?
Yeah, I've had a lot of opportunity to speak about my dad because he was a business owner. And given what I do for work, people are often interested in how a person, comes to their own success and what the story of that is. And also, I think importantly, what the story of carrying on that legacy is. But life and my experiences have taught me that, and I can talk more about that in a little bit, but have taught me that that's not the only important thing. And what I realized across all of the opportunities I've had to be on a stage and talking about my dad is I've not really had the opportunity to talk about my mom. I'm certainly as much influenced by her as I was by him, but she a lot of times doesn't get the spotlight just because of the typical questions that people think to ask. So there's just I don't know if I know all the answers to what parts of her story have impacted my legacy and how that plays a part, but I was excited to be able to have this conversation with you just to explore that.
Yeah, yeah. I really, really appreciate you bringing this to the fore. And I just have to share with you, just within sort of the space of, family wealth and legacy, that it's been interesting to me that in speaking with Jessica McGauley recently out of London, and also Bryn Monahan, that they both chose people who were not necessarily sort of the like highlighted, elevated family members in their family, coming from a more prominent figure, whatever form that took. And I really appreciate how this seems to be coming more to, I don't know, people's minds. And I think especially women's stories and women's lives. So I know you have a lot of thoughts on that too, like how important it is that we kind of give equal space to both men and women and boys and girls. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about who your mom was and what kind of person she was, especially sort of in the quote unquote shadow of your dad.
Mm. Well, point of interest to what you were saying first is I found it interesting in myself that preparing for this conversation and even having this conversation is more difficult. It took more mining and somehow feels more complicated and emotional. It's almost like the easy story to tell is the one that's out front. And so I don't know, there's just something interesting and curious underneath of that. But and it's really, I mean, it's hard to capture both my mom and my dad in a couple of sentences, but specifically for my mom, if I could pin it down to one thing, she was just all about relentless love. She taught me how to love, both in a spiritual way, because she shared faith with me and raised me in the church, but more important than that, raised me to understand, I don't know, kind of like your place in the world, to understand that you are one small person and there's a big world, that you're put here for a purpose by a creator to make a contribution of your unique skills and strengths and talents. Like, I don't know, you know how parents now get a bad rep for like raising their kids with almost like too much self-esteem. Like you can do anything, and the whole participant trophy, the challenges associated with that. She didn't necessarily do that, but she definitely raised me in a strong culture of love. But it was almost tempered by this idea that like you are very loved and that's not the end of the story. You are meant to go and be loved and invest that into the world. And so that manifested in all sorts of ways. She was a fun mom to have. She would let you, certainly after my parents' divorce, so it was just the two of us. She'd be like, "Do you just want to get frozen yogurt for dinner?" Like, definitely.
I just read that in your prep documents. I was like, okay, let's talk about that. Like, do you think that came from a place of, having a quote unquote healthy dinner every night is not necessarily the most important thing in the balance of what needs to happen in a day, or what, or was that just a quirk? Like, how do you interpret that?
I think both. She always put relationship first. And so I think that was part of it. If we were out and about and having a good time, why do we want to go prioritize, healthy foods on top of everything else? But I also think that from the standpoint of her legacy, I think that she was raised not necessarily on a diet of super healthy foods. So I think that some of that may have been left over. She certainly, made dinner most nights, and I don't want to make it out to be that she wasn't focused on that at all, because she was. But if you were out and about and you could have frozen yogurt for dinner, you definitely should make the choice to do that. So
Yeah.
which is
And so, I just want to like kind of come back a little bit, because you had shared this in our previous conversation, that she was, as you said, not this perfect person, that she got married, I think 6 times, if I'm not mistaken. And that yet she infused your life, with so much love and generosity. And if you were to, have the chance to have her sit down or walk around and share some of her life story, I'm wondering if that's part of your curiosity. Like, what would be the questions that you would really want to ask her? And it sounds like, her approach to love is one, but maybe go a little bit more into that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't think well, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's like 8 years before she died. She died in 2021. So she had, I don't know, kind of like waning access to be able to make reflection on her life. So it's really been over a decade since I've had the opportunity just to speak with her in reflection of her life in a way that was, where she had a lot of clarity. So it would be interesting to have her make reflection on what it's like to grow up or to have raised kids and to move through life in the shadow of success. Um, I think that I think that I know what she would say, but you don't
What do
actually.
you think she would say?
Um, I think that she would not make a big deal of it. I think that she would minimize the important role that she played in my life and my dad's life and the life of countless other people, because that's how she is and that's how she's wired. I think to not really recognize the really strong impact that the small things and ways that she invests in other people's lives make a huge difference. And especially my dad, like really, one of the things I was thinking about in preparation for this conversation is like all of the small things that she did to support my dad and our family, including, if you think about the wealth creator, the business owner, there's so much going on. They're so busy. Who's taking their dog to the vet? That person plays in a really important role. And I think when you think about her bringing, my dog's black labs, hunting dogs that weighed twice what she weighed to the vet and all of the other things, going through the ridiculous pile of mail that came into our house and going to all of the evening dinners with business contacts. I think all of that is a huge piece of the puzzle, but I know that she would minimize it and not really recognize the impact that all of that made.
Mm, mm, mm. And what do you suspect was the major influence on her way of being, this loving, generous way that it sounds like she was? I mean, you mentioned faith earlier, but uh, what
It's,
what's behind that?
I think that her faith did shape her worldview, and I caught that from her because she lived it out. There's always the notion of you can definitely tell your kids to do something, but if you're not actually modeling that, it's much less likely to be transmitted. And so she lived it out more than she talked about it, which I think made a huge impact on my life and many other people's lives, friends of hers as well. I mean, literally strangers. I think she truly believed that she was meant to share the love of God with other people. She truly believed that. And her life was an example of that. Throughout my childhood, I don't think there was ever a moment where we did not have like a little old lady who we would pick up on our way to church or bring out to lunch and get them out of the house. It was almost like literally, I can name off at least four of them in my mind right now throughout my childhood. Of course, they're older, right? So they pass. And I don't know if she was intentional about this as it seems, but then there'd be another person who, we'd be taking care of and going over it. It was just like a normal thing for us. She just made it a normal part of our lives. It was not like she was like, we need to volunteer. She didn't really talk like that. She just did it,
Mm,
which is awesome.
yeah, yeah. I'm just like struck with this memory right now, and I remember one year my family it was near Christmas time, and I guess one of the people who worked for my dad was having a really, really hard time. And I remember my mother like having us go around to the Christmas tree and like gifts that were already wrapped for us. Like, and we put it in this like in the trunk of the car and we went and like met this gentleman who I sort of knew worked for my dad. And like, so I feel like it's within that line of like we're not, I mean, there is formal volunteership, right? But like it's within that line of ethos and spirit. It sounds like she was very much that way. And um,
Yes. Thank you for saying that, because I think what that unlocks for me is this idea of just keeping your eyes open to the needs of the people that are around you and just responding. And she did that in such simple ways. Even so, she was known for it. And it's funny how the things, just like what you were sharing, the events that happen in your life kind of come to you, to your mind, to your memory at odd times. So it occurred to me when I was with the kids when they were younger in the car and an ambulance went by, that she would always stop whatever we were doing, whatever we were talking about, and she would say, let's pray for those people, because obviously there's someone who's going through a crisis right now. So she would literally stop and be like, dear Lord, whatever they're going through, I just pray that you would be with them, bring the right doctors around them. I mean, it's just amazing that's just some little small thing that speaks volumes about her attunement to the needs of whatever was happening around her, but also not just like, oh, those poor people, but what role can I play in helping those people who are having a terrible day? Don't know what it is, but just to make a small difference in whatever way I can.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I can just, only imagine the loss that you sort of felt, like, I think probably over time as your mom was um moving more and more into having Alzheimer's and losing her clarity. W- what happened sort of in the end of her life? Because you've shared sort of, I don't know if it was just 1 week or there was sort of a really important period of time at the end of her life. I'd love to have you share that story of um, what you learned yourself from that experience.
I learned so much. And if you can have a beautiful death, my mom had a beautiful death leading up to, I mean, Alzheimer's is not for the faint of heart. So I don't want to say that like the whole journey was beautiful, because anyone who's lived through it knows that that was not the case. But the last week of her life was just amazing. She had invested so much in so many people. And when you've done that, it was clear to see that that came back to her in the last week of her life. So I would say there was like a community of women who came around her. She was in our home when she passed, and we knew that, we had hospice come in, and so they'll give you just a rough estimate of when she would pass. So my sister was there, and someone who's like a sister to us was there, and my mom's best friend, who I call Aunt Linda, she was there, as well as other friends who'd gathered around. And it's just exactly how she would want it. We were bedside and, sharing stories and Christian worship music on the TV. And this one kind of was what? Christian worship music, just like meditative.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just beautiful, just exactly how she would want it. And it was funny, Jamie, because gosh, there's so many stories from that week, but I mean, she's loving, but also side of stubborn. So it seemed like in the evening she would get really like labored breathing, and we'd be like, we'd take turns kind of eating and going in. One of us would come in and say, you guys, I think this is it. I'm pretty sure this is it. So we'd all gather around and do like, this is not the first person I've watched die. I've had the beautiful experience of watching, my dad die and my mother-in-law die. So I feel like I know how to do this, right? So you gather around and say like, we love you, Mom. And like, we all took a turn, and then like, she's not dying. And then it happens, and the next night, same thing's happening, where we're looking at each other going like, oh my goodness, what's going on? Even the hospice workers were like, I don't know how she's still holding on here. I don't know what's happening. But what we joked about is saying like, if she can see this, if she has any consciousness about what's happening here, this is like what she would absolutely love the most. We also had, the unbelievable story, in addition to the fact that her actual death was beautiful. The hospice, there'll be like musicians who volunteer. So the hospice musician came to literally play guitar, Christian worship music. And she passed literally, and there are like two miraculous stories. I happened to take video because a friend of mine texted me and said, how's it going? So I took video saying, you'll never believe this beautiful moment. So I was sitting there with, some others in the room, and I took video of her, and I took video of the woman who was playing music. And then when that song was over, the hospice worker said, I think that she's passed. And when I was able to look back at the video, my mom, who had not moved in days and had one of those wooden crosses in her hand, while she's laying, lifted the cross and put it down in the middle of the song, which I didn't pick up on in the video. So that's insane. And kind of the most beautiful death, again, exactly how she would want it, but a wilder story that really for me is sort of a cornerstone moment that I am still figuring out and still making meaning out of. Is we had the perfect nurse. Just her showing up at my house was a miracle in and of itself, because she was exactly what I needed. She was there for my mom, right, as a nurse, but she was really my nurse as well, like my emotional support and spiritual support person for sure. And so she called me on a day that she had off, and she said, I'm coming over today. And she lives like over an hour away. And I was like, you're not scheduled today. What do you mean? And she said, I've had this dream and I need to tell you about it in person. And I have a message for you. So I'm coming to your house. She said, I know. And she said, I'll be coming to your house every day. And I'm not coming for your mom. I'm coming for you, because I know that your mom's time is really close to the end. So she's like, she won't need me, really. So amazingly, when she gets to my house, she tells me this story. And I had never talked to her about my work or whatever. She tells me this story. You spend a lot of time focusing on and helping other people around the legacy of financial capital that your dad invested in you. And now it's time for you to focus on your mom's spiritual legacy. Wow. And how you can pass that along. And then there was this tie-in, Jamie, to oak trees, which is really wild too, because Nurse Linda did not know that I had written a children's book several months earlier where an oak tree is at the centerpiece, thinking about a family tree. So apparently in her dream, she was like, there's the symbol of the oak tree and the acorns that fall and how they take plant. And so she has, through the love that she gives to everyone else, has planted all of this in other people. And no pressure, but now, it's yours to carry on this legacy. So the way that tied into my whole life and work was just breathtaking, really. That was wild.
Wow. So, this is almost the most tangible way that, in the course of these kind of conversations, I often ask people, how have you been, and how do you endeavor to sort of live on the legacy of this important person in your life? And it seems like you were just really given the sort of outline of what the task is. How have you taken that on, or what has that meant for you in your personal life, with your family and your boys, and with your work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess if God speaks to me, it needs to be like super clear and very overt.
You got clarity.
Yeah, but it's this. I guess I will say I've had to move through, I guess my mom's been gone a few years now, and I've had to move through, honestly, like year one, of course, you're grieving, but like I also felt, I don't want to say like the burden, in the same way that I have felt the burden of my dad's financial legacy, and how do you do right by this and honor it, by growing it and being generous and all of that. I realized that I felt the same degree of burden about this spiritual legacy of love and passing on faith and love as well. And in, I don't know, maybe even more, in an even greater way, because that's much harder to do, actually. Especially what I've noticed is when I tried to do that in the way that she did it, exactly, just like replicated exactly how she did it, it doesn't work. And gosh, especially with boys, it's like,
because you need to make fun, right?
Yeah, 2 sons and young adults now, and anything that's too overtly spiritual or feels like inauthentic lands like a lead balloon. So whenever I've tried to do it exactly how she did it, I realize it's a swing and a miss. And of course that's the case. It's just been my learning journey. That's always the case with trying to carry on a legacy. You can't do it how they did it. You have to just take what they put inside of you and incorporate it into who you are and how you show up, which has been my focus more recently. And I think that that's going better.
I'm glad to hear it. So, yeah, because I was going to ask, I assume that you also you'll end up working with clients in your coaching practice who aren't necessarily having their own faith or a Christian faith, um, and how still your mom's spirit and her beliefs translate into how you work with and help the clients that you work with.
Mm.
How have you seen that in, like, let's say the last 3 years, I guess, come through you?
Yeah, that's a good question because it is really common that my clients, don't necessarily share the Christian faith, and maybe I don't even know because we haven't gotten into topics of faith, but we have gotten into topics of spiritual capital. And I think that the way of loving people and getting authentic and to the core of what matters to people, sort of like getting underneath the thing that's at the surface to really connect authentically with someone, I think is what she taught me. And when you get there, it very commonly with clients will lead to conversations about spiritual capital, more broadly speaking. Being, what's your intention? What's your purpose? What's your why? Why are you waking up in the morning? What's getting in the way? How do you actually want to be living and what matters most to you? And then typically there are things for all of us that are getting in the way, that are limiting what we can be and do in that lane. And when am able to get into conversations with clients about that, that seems to be where the real potential lies in the areas of growth and development that they can make. And so there's something about the way that she taught me to love people in a very authentic way that seems to be able to unlock those conversations, which help people to then grow themselves in their spiritual capital, what matters most in whatever way that manifests for them.
Yeah. When you talk about the way that she loved people, you talked a little bit about sort of helping people get to church and things like that. But talk to me more about the way she loved people.
Hmm. I remember when I was in high school, someone knocked at the door, and it was a friend of hers who I frankly didn't know very well. And my mom then explained to me that she was going to be moving in with us because she had fallen in hard times and did not have another place to go. And that was normal in our house. So I think to be able to normalize that in your life, to say, you know, again, just being open to the needs around you. That was nothing that was on her schedule, on her calendar, to have a friend move in with us, who lived with us for, I mean, it was like probably a year. I think those types of things that she was the friend that if someone needed to, take their parent to the hospital because they were having surgery, or to go on some wild goose chase. I remember there was a friend of hers when I was growing up, and I grew up in Detroit. And so I think there were some medications that you were not able to get here, like certain antibiotics that one of her friends needed for her parent. And so she would go to Canada, they'd go across the border and get the medication every month together. Like, she was just the friend that you call when you just need a buddy, someone to be with you, because you know that there's going to be support there. And she was that way. For so many people, for countless people, which means so much, I think, to have someone that you can rely on, certainly in a world where there's so much social isolation happening now. I think you're reading about it in trends, but you're feeling it a little bit in the culture as well. So to be able to have the kind of friend that you can call and you know is going to show up for you, whether you're showering your aging parent or whether you're, going to get frozen yogurt, means so much.
Yeah, yeah. If you think back, and I know she had Alzheimer's for quite a while, but if you think back of scenes of her in it that you would love to have captured on film,
Mm.
of her doing or being or like whatever, it could be tiny. Like what do you wish you had of of her on film? What scenes, what moments?
Yeah, you wish that you could rewind the clock, right? And have the opportunity to do that. Um, I think for sure her grandparenting scenes with my kids when they were little. So sweet. She was a great grandmother. The kids called her Mimi, which was very sweet. So she was great with them. And I think rewinding, she was so supportive to everyone. So if you could drop into moments um, with each of those people who were main characters in her life that she had such a strong relationship with, in the particular ways that she was showing up for them, which was different for all of them based on what they were going through, right? So you could easily be the friend that says, I love people in the same way, but she was not that way. She would just show up into whatever was going on in your life. So that looked different for the way that she loved my brother, who's her stepson, which she treated as her own, and they had a really sweet relationship. So I think that for me, I would love to just, if I could put on film, drop into the unique ways that she loved each person. For me, it was like, she would come to practice, Jamie. Like, you don't need to come to sports practice. You can come to the game. But she'd be sitting at practice, not to be like the annoying mom who's going to critique the coach, just because she'd be like my biggest fan. So
Yeah.
those little
Yeah. Absolutely beautiful. Um, this is sort of complicated also because of like your final, 8, 10 years of your memories of her. I'm sure you had limited conversation ability with her. My grandmother also had Alzheimer's. So I think I have an idea that maybe the memory of like the last time you had like a true like peer sort of conversation with her was a while ago. But at this point, given everything, and the time that's passed, what do you think you would want to, and this doesn't have to be like grand necessarily, it could be like very particular or whatever, but what would you want to say to her now, today, if she just walked in and she had like clarity of mind? What would you want to say to her?
Well, I think immediately what comes to mind is gratitude for all of the things that we've talked about today. Maybe you never, and I think that I try to be intentional about this, but maybe you never actually express the gratitude to people in present life that you wish to after they're gone, right? So immediately that. But then I think I have questions, almost like then I move right into questions and having her coach me, because I have this job of carrying on her role now, right? So immediately I move to questions about how to do that effectively. But again, I think, to answer your earlier question,
What are your top questions? I'm gonna just butt in here, like, since that's what comes to mind. Like, what are your top 3 questions? Being a professional and an expert in this field that's so respected and still like learning and growing, like what are you still wondering about?
I think how to operationalize all of the things that she did. So maybe zooming in on those moments and saying like, okay, when this friend was about to move in, like, what were the obstacles? And like,
Yeah.
obviously there were concerns and fears that you had. Like, how did you navigate through all of that, just mentally speaking? How do you be relentless in sharing your faith in the face of resistance, like with young adult boys where, maybe they're going like, this doesn't feel relevant to me. How do you come back in with positivity? But I think if I could, again, anticipate her reaction to that, I think it would sort of be the type of thing where like, you just do it. Like, and same with the friend, like your friend is struggling. Yes, there's some concerns, but like, you just hop right over those and go back to loving people well.
Yeah.
Just based on how I would anticipate who she is and how she would respond to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, she didn't overthink any of it. Like, she just rolled the sleeves up and mix.
Yeah. Yeah. Rolling the sleeves up seems to be a good answer to most things.
Yes.
Well, I have to tell you I'm trying to remember now. I think we first met in 2017. So it's been
Yeah,
7 years
at
or
least.
so now. That um in your efforts to emulate your mom and live out her legacy, I have to say, you certainly have, in my experience of you and my relationship with you. Um, so I hope you're not too hard on yourself because I think you lead with curiosity and certainly love. Um, you know, coming from, I mean, I remember sort of entering this field and this space, and I think it was my very first time ever attending the Purposeful Planning Institute, I think, and you were there, and I attended your session, and I was like, I don't know, I was blown away with how tender-hearted you were, and at the same time, how you knew your stuff. It was like you had this beautiful balance of those two things. So I really think your mom is definitely like shining down on you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's definitely
Yeah.
her. When you described that, you could have described her. So thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, we need like a million more years to talk about the rest of your mom's life, but I think we're gonna have to end here. And I so enjoy sharing this space and getting to know your mom a little bit. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to highlight her story. I think it's important. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.